Nice. Okay. So I'll start in Indonesia first, Ben. Jadi
Okay.
selamat malam teman-teman. Terima kasih sudah meluangkan waktunya malam-malamnya untuk berdiskusi bersama Skole. Dan hari ini ada Ben dan ada saya dan juga ada Faiz. Jadi Faiz ini juga salah satu member dari Skole, teman-teman. Dan kali ini kita akan menghabiskan malam kita untuk berbicara soal ateisme. Dan kami sangat mengapresiasi teman-teman yang malam-malam ya Faiz ya mau untuk berdiskusi dan ngobrol soal ateisme. Sekali lagi, kalau misalnya teman-teman ada pertanyaan, langsung aja chat di ruang chat. Jadi nggak usah malu-malu. Dan nanti kalau misalnya ada pertanyaan langsung aja kalian bisa nyalain kamera dan juga turn on mic kalian. Oke, jadi begitu untuk teman-teman. Oke, kita langsung mulai saja dan aku akan mulai perkenalkan dulu Ben dan juga apa sih Skole ID ini. Oke. Good evening everyone, and also good morning for Ben, who's in the eastern part of USA. Am I right, Ben?
Correct.
Yeah. Sure. Today we're really glad to have Ben here. But before we introduce Ben, maybe I'll share a bit what is Skole and what is Skole first. So what is Skole ID? So Skole ID is a hub who's providing an accessible philosophy talks for laymen, for the public, and we organize weekly philosophy course and other philosophy courses. We also write daily articles and then weekly discussions for free in the hope to increase public criticism. We invite global and local philosophers for our weekly discussions. Some of them are William Lane Craig, Professor Graham Oppy, Philip Goff from Durham, and also Indonesians, local philosophers like Hardito Sandi, and also Eugene Nagasawa and other philosophers. We could say that we are the first philosophy hub in Indonesia who have the initiative to invite global philosophers to have a talk in Indonesia. And we know that it is important for us to have the connection between each one of us because whether you are in academia or not, it is important to be aware of the progress in philosophy in the global context, issues, topics, which currently discussed by the global community of philosophers. So that's why we invited, like today we have Ben Benjamin Smith-Watkins from Real Theology Podcast. So you guys could check it out, and I'll share the link maybe later in the YouTube descriptions, who and which could you access that podcast. And later maybe could share to us what is Real Theology. And he has this research interest in philosophy of religion, especially I guess arguments for God and the non-existence of God, of course. And interestingly, guys, Ben actually has his undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. Yeah, am I right?
That is right.
It will be interesting, like why you take that and why you later go into philosophy. I'll ask about that later. And he gained his degree in mechanical engineering from the University of South Carolina, and he currently resides in Virginia, where he works as nuclear engineer for the Department of Defense. So once again, Ben, thank you for your willingness. Thank you for taking your time to talk here. The little hub in Indonesia, and we're really glad to have you.
It's an honor to be here. I'm super excited to be able to talk philosophy from America in Indonesia. This is a real treat for me.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so it's really an honor for us to have you. So maybe I'll just jump out to the questions. Yeah, but it's okay. Oh, maybe you
That's great.
First about your project then, Real Theology. What is Real Theology, and why Real Theology?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one of our favorite questions to ask in our Real Atheology project is why philosophy of religion? Why should we even care about the philosophy of religion? And so our answer is that we think the philosophy of religion is important because it touches on so many different areas in philosophy itself. So for people who are interested in learning more about philosophy, the philosophy of religion is a really great entry point into that, because Philosophy of religion will touch on things like the philosophy of mind, moral philosophy, epistemology, the study of knowledge, obviously metaphysics. So there's just a broad range of philosophical topics that can be brought to bear on questions within the philosophy of religion. So with Real Atheology, what we want to do with our project is explore questions in the philosophy of religion from non-theistic perspectives. So I myself am an atheist, but we have agnostics on our team as well. And so we want to provide the non-theistic perspective of how to approach these questions. And we also want to see what our religious concepts can look like as atheists and agnostics. Do we have to discard the concept of religion if we're an atheist or agnostic? Or are there religious traditions and religious concepts that can continue on? And what can those forms of life look like?
I'll translate first, Ben. Oke, jadi teman-teman, Real Atheology itu adalah suatu proyek gitu ya, proyek dari Ben dan beberapa teman-teman yang lain, suatu podcast gitu ya, podcast yang mana mencoba untuk berfokus di dalam berbicara mengenai filsafat agama. Nah, salah satu hal yang dia pertanyakan itu adalah soal kenapa harus peduli pada filsafat agama gitu ya. Maksudnya, apakah zaman sekarang masih relevan, dan bahkan Ben orang ateis gitu ya, dan dia masih peduli. Nanti kita tanya kenapa ya. Jadi, kenapa penting filsafat agama? Karena ada banyak hal yang bisa didiskusikan di dalam filsafat agama. Dan filsafat agama adalah titik masuk bagi orang yang baik untuk belajar filsafat. Bisa bicara soal filsafat akal budi, filsafat moral, epistemologi, metafisika, dan berbagai aspek lain. Jadi ada banyak yang bisa didiskusikan, dan Real Atheology coba untuk eksplorasi hal-hal tersebut dari perspektif non-theistic. Dan ya mereka mau melihat bagaimana konsep-konsep tersebut dipahami secara non-theistic, gitu loh teman-teman. So Ben, it's really interesting because we usually think atheists don't care about religion. Sometimes people think like that, but why do you think it is important to talk about those issues, religion and philosophy of religion in the perspective of non-theistic or even non-theistic perspectives?
So I think there are two really good reasons to care about it. So first is religion is such a very big part of culture and society as a whole. So it's not something that we can just ignore. We were likely selected for it, and religions are going to evolve over time. So understanding the concepts and the foundations and where other religious people are coming from is really, really important. Which then brings me to the second reason why we should care, is because what can religion inform atheists and agnostics about our forms of life? There are still questions that remain, like, what is faith? How does faith relate to science? Or how to live a good life? And so I think the tools that we can glean from religious concepts are very, very useful for both non-theists and theists alike. And the third reason is it's fun. It's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to learn philosophy. And for me, it's just a very fulfilling hobby.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's fun, and yeah. Oke, I'll translate. Tiga alasan teman-teman. Kenapa filsafat agama, dan sebagai ateis, kenapa ngomongin agama? Pertama, karena agama memang konsep yang sangat besar dan penting. Ya, kenapa penting? Karena kita lihat masih mayoritas orang masih beragama. Kedua, agama itu terus berubah sesuai dengan waktu, sehingga penting itu masih bagian pertama. Kedua, juga bagaimana agama berkaitan dengan perspektif non-theistic sendiri. Agama dan iman, agama dan sains, dan berbagai aspek-aspek lainnya. Dan ketiga, kata Ben, itu menyenangkan. Gitu ya. Kayak kenal-kenalan sama orang-orang, segala macam. Gitu. Jadi, itu hal yang sangat menyenangkan buat Ben secara personal. Ben, I guess there's something wrong with your microphone. So it's like making some sounds.
Let's see if I can fix that now.
Do you hear what I hear? Like,
Yeah,
I don't hear anything, but
it's getting
yeah.
It's okay right now. Yeah.
It's stop. Yeah.
Yeah, it's stopped right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay, good.
Okay. I'll continue to the questions, Ben. Yeah. So, yeah, I really love. Philosophy of religion is fun, and actually, I started to philosophizing, Ben, also because of religion. I first encountered philosophy in apologetics. I raised as an evangelical, even though it's in Indonesia, but I raised as an evangelical, and I met apologetics, and I actually took philosophy to start. I want to be apologist, but I end up fell in love with philosophy instead of apologetics, and right now I'm doing what I am doing right now. I fell in love too much with philosophy. But anyway, Ben, that's my personal experiences. I wonder, do you have any those kind of experiences? I mean, do you ever, even though you're an atheist right now, and yeah, right now you debate a lot of theistic thinkers out there, but do you ever, were you ever atheist in your childhood, and have you ever had any, like, I don't know, spiritual experiences, or how and why did you later turn into to atheism?
Yes, so I was raised religious, and I have a very similar story to yours in that when I was in my early 20s, I began to question my faith, and I turned to apologetics, and apologetics was my window into philosophy. And as I went deeper and deeper into the philosophy, my faith waned and waned and waned until I eventually realized that I was an atheist. And so that's kind of, I don't think there was any real particular moment in which, there was no decisive argument that put me in the atheist camp. It was just kind of something that happened over time. And now I find myself in love with the philosophy of religion and continuing on discussing it and trying to see if we can make progress.
Oke, ya, jadi kalau
religious experience, I forgot about religious experience. I'm sorry, I left that part of the question off. So one of the things that worried when I struggled with my faith is I had not had any what I thought were religious experiences. But in 2017, so about 4 years ago, I would say I had what was the closest I've had to a religious experience when I witnessed a total solar eclipse. And I'm sure people have seen pictures and videos of a total solar eclipse, but let me tell you, there is no picture or video that I've ever seen that captures the awe of a total solar eclipse. And I have a feeling that if I had seen that 500 or 1,000 years ago and I didn't know what that was, I would have been like, there's a God and he's really mad at us. So, but if anyone gets the opportunity to witness a total solar eclipse, I cannot recommend it enough. It's truly an awe-inspiring experience. And for me, it was an awe-inspiring religious experience for nature. I would see something like nature itself as something divine or as something worthy of our reverence.
Ya, I'll translate, Ben. Jadi kenapa jadi ateis gitu ya? Pertama-tama alasannya sama kayak saya, teman-teman. Jadi saya itu bukan jadi ateis, sorry. Maksudnya masuk ke filsafat itu alasannya pertama. Jadi dari ini ya, pertanyaan iman gitu loh. Tapi end up beliau ini, Ben ini akhirnya pergi ke satu pendekatan apologetis gitu ya. Maksudnya mencoba untuk mencari argumen-argumen bagi keberadaan Tuhan. Tapi dia sama gitu ya, ngalamin apa yang saya alamin gitu, malah jatuh cinta sama filsafat, dan at the end setelah bergulat dengan berbagai argumen yang ada, dia memilih untuk menjadi ateis, meskipun tidak ada satu turning point, kayak satu titik yang oke, gue tahu nih gue jadi ateis, gitu nggak ada, tapi lebih progres perlahan. Ada pengalaman spiritual nggak? Katanya ada. Pengalaman spiritualnya itu adalah ketika melihat ini gerhana matahari. Jadi gerhana matahari itu suatu hal, pengalaman yang mengagumkan gitu loh, teman-teman. Kalau dia lihat itu 500 atau 1000 tahun yang lalu, dia bisa merasa kalau itu adalah kerja dari Tuhan gitu loh. Tapi sayangnya sekarang udah enggak kan. Kita tahu ada apa di belakang gerhana matahari. Jadi itu kisah daripada si Ben gitu. Oke, yeah, it's interesting, Ben. But yeah, I'm going to ask again one more thing about your project, Real Theology, Ben. So if I watch some of your videos and if I read some of your writings or in the Real Theology podcast, I could see you try to distinct yourself, you guys, with the new atheist movements. I wonder why, and what do you think about the new atheist movement? I wonder.
Yes, so I see the new atheist movement more as a political movement than I do as a philosophical movement. So the new atheists are largely a reaction to fundamentalist religion, especially in America, and especially in the wake of something like the September 11th terrorist attacks that happened here in 2001. And so a lot of the new atheist thinkers kind of you know, only engage with the religious traditions that obviously have a lot of problems and aren't very plausible to begin with. That's not to say that they aren't serious thinkers. Richard Dawkins is a brilliant biologist. Daniel Dennett is probably one of the most well-known, well-respected philosophers, of the last century. And of course, Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens have very sharp wits and are both very smart. Hitchens is a journalist, and Sam Harris is a neuroscientist. And so, but their work only goes so deep. And it often inspires a lot of people to be hostile towards religion. And so we like to distinguish ourselves from that movement in the sense that we don't want to be hostile to the people we're interacting with, and we also want it to go deeper than what the new atheists are able to really help us. Like, we want to actually do the philosophy rather than leaning so heavily on rhetoric.
Okay, jadi I'll try to translate first, and then maybe I have some follow-up question. So, jadi aku nanya teman-teman, apa perbedaan antara gerakan yang Ben kerjakan sama ateisme baru? Ateisme baru adalah gerakan-gerakan yang kalau teman-teman tahu tuh isinya orang-orang seperti Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, dan juga Hitchens. Tapi mereka itu orang-orang hebat, gitu ya. Mereka hebat di bidang mereka masing-masing. Tapi kalau menurut Ben, mereka itu tidak lebih baik dibilang sebagai gerakan politis dibandingkan gerakan yang memang filosofis. Dan Ben merasa bahwa diperlukan diskusi atau pemahaman yang lebih mendalam terhadap agama dibandingkan semata-mata sekedar retoris seperti yang dilakukan sama orang-orang dari ateisme baru. Nah, mungkin kita bisa tanya selanjutnya nih, yang dimaksud dengan retoris itu bagaimana sih? Itu ya. Okay, Ben. So anyway, when we're talking about atheism here in Indonesia, almost, I agree with you. They are brilliant thinker, but maybe they're not. We need like more something deeper, more philosophical in talking about religions. But anyway, in Indonesia, we also have, they actually quite well known in Indonesia, but like Dawkins, Harris and Hitchens, they're quite known. And I think, but I personally think that it's also important for us, to listen to, just like what you say, those who try to think religion deeper, and more philosophical, and that's why I think we try to do this, with Opi and with you, that's what we think. And I wonder, what do you mean to say that how new atheists lean more in rhetorics? Can you try to elaborate it more?
Could you ask the question one more time?
Why did you say that the new atheists depend more in the rhetorics?
Yes. So if you were to read their writings, you're not going to really get something like a serious engagement with something like cosmological arguments or teleological arguments or ontological arguments. So Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, kind of briefly glosses over them, but it's nothing like a serious treatment that you would find in something like J.L. Mackey's The Miracle of Theism or J.H. Sobel's Logic and Theism. So it just doesn't go very deep. So what is it that they're writing about? Well, a lot of it is rhetoric. It's pushing back on the fundamentalist conceptions of religion, things like the earth being 6,000 years old, or that biological evolution is some sort of hoax. These kind of, they don't have a whole lot of respect for those views. Not saying that they should, but that's where a lot of their focus goes on. And then, of course, there's lots of political issues that they're reacting to. So there's a very strong pro-life movement about abortion in America that's very religiously based. Teaching creationism instead of biological evolution is something that is the court, the Supreme Court has had to come in America and rule on. So there are these issues that stand out in the political sphere that they spend a great deal of their time trying to undermine and actually show how current religions are harmful in society. Whereas obviously we want to go deeper in the philosophy. We can concede all of those points and the rhetoric of the new atheists. However, we want to go deeper.
Okay, thank you Ben. I'll translate again. Jadi teman-teman, tadi Ben bilang kalau misalnya ateisme baru itu lebih banyak retorisnya. Nah, maksudnya apa tuh? Ya mereka new atheist atau ateisme baru tidak bisa dibandingkan sama para filsuf-filsuf yang tadi Ben sebut, misalnya G.L. Mackie gitu ya, dan mungkin yang pernah Scully undang juga Graham Oppy gitu, yang mana memang secara serius memikirkan pertanyaan-pertanyaan filosofis. Kalau misalnya ateisme baru itu lagi gerakan politis ya, ngomongin soal fundamentalisme agama, gerakan-gerakan pro-life gitu ya, anti aborsi segala macam. Terus apakah sebaiknya mengajarkan teori evolusi atau tidak? Itu konteks Amerika banget, gitu ya, konteks Amerika banget, yang mana memang banyak atau kental dengan nuansa fundamentalisme agamanya. Gitu. Jadi beda pendekatannya. Dan umumnya orang-orang new atheist itu atau ateisme baru ini punya pandangan yang bermusuhan kepada orang-orang beragama. Dan menurut Ben itu bukan suatu hal yang baik, karena ya memang ide-ide itu mungkin harmful ya, ide-ide itu mungkin harmful, tapi nggak seperti itu kita create-nya. Kita bisa diskusi dan kita bisa berdialog lah dengan mereka. Gitu. Jadi itu yang membedakan ateisme baru sama apa yang coba Ben kerjakan di dalam proyek ini. Okay, Ben. So yeah, because we're talking, I'll continue to the next questions, yeah, Ben. So we're talking about atheism. So can you give me like the definition of atheism? Some people, an example Dawkins, he consider atheism as lack of knowledge, or everyone is an atheist, or other religious believers who believe in different concept of God, things like that. What is? Do you agree with him, or do you have your own opinion about what actually is atheism?
Yes. So the thing about language is that it's plastic. So we can use words to mean whatever we want them to mean. And so I don't have any in principle objection to people defining atheist in certain ways. But definitions are also embedded in a much larger concept that's called a language game, where a language game is a metaphor for the rules of a game. So different language games will have different rules. And so within the philosophy of religion, there's already an established language game. Historically, there's already an established language game where atheism is understood as the belief that there is no God, whereas theism is a positive claim that there is at least one God, and agnosticism, which claims that the question of God's existence is just indeterminate. And then if we wanted to characterize someone who merely just lacked a belief that there is a God, if we wanted to make a claim about someone's psychological state, we just call them a non-theist. And so I think that this is the language game we should use, because it doesn't introduce confusion. Everyone knows what we mean by it. And it's the historical and ordinary sense of the term atheism. And so I get a lot of pushback on this because I actually provide an argument for this language game. And so I'll lay it out roughly if that's all right with you. It basically starts with the idea that theism should be defined as the proposition that God exists. And so I think that's a pretty straightforward premise. This is how theists use the term. And so that's just, we should accept that, that this is what theists are claiming. And so I think that my second premise is that the term atheism should be defined in terms of theism. And this is just because if we didn't have a concept of theism, we just wouldn't have a concept of atheism. The only reason we have a term like atheism is because we have this term theism. So I think it's just straightforward that atheism should be defined in terms of theism. And so my third premise is that the proposition that God exists, what we're calling theism, is not the psychological condition of believing there is a God. That's just not what theists mean when they say there's a proposition that God exists and it's either true or false. And so these three premises entail that atheism should not be defined as the absence or lack of the psychological condition of believing that God exists. And so I think this is a fairly straightforward argument that makes use of at least three premises that should be uncontroversial. But I have found that many atheists push back very, very strongly on this definition, this language game that I'm offering that uses this definition of atheism. They think that I'm trying to tell them how they should use words, which is not what I'm doing.
Ben, I'm so sorry. I think we lost Samuel.
He's right there.
Oh, right. Okay.
Hey, sorry, Ben. I'm sorry. The connection is I don't know. It's suddenly.
It's all good. Where did you get cut off from what I was saying? And I
so
can repeat it.
You need to define atheism from the theism. Your second premise.
Yes. So the second premise. Well, I'll just lay them all out real quick again. Just for theism should be defined as the proposition that God exists. Atheism should be defined in terms of theism. That's the second premise. And then the third premise is the proposition God exists is not the psychological condition of believing there is a God. So these three premises entail that atheism should not be defined as the absence or lack of a psychological condition in believing that there is a God. And so a lot of people think that I'm trying to tell them how to use words. I'm not doing that. I'm arguing for a language game. I'm saying that if you accept these three premises, then my language game is what follows from those premises, and that's the language game we should be using.
I'll translate it then to the participants. Jadi, teman-teman, ateisme itu apa sih? Sebagian orang itu mendeskripsikan ateisme sebagai lack of knowledge gitu ya, atau kurangnya kita terhadap suatu pengetahuan, yaitu pengetahuan mengenai Tuhan. Tapi definisi itu buat Ben agak kurang tepat gitu ya. Kenapa? Karena dia punya punya suatu argumen dan dia menyampaikan dalam 3 premis gitu ya. Jadi untuk memahami soal ateisme, kita harus pahami di dalam kondisi permainan bahasa atau language game yang ada gitu ya. Yang ya kalau kalian pernah dengar Wittgenstein itu dari terminologi Wittgenstein gitu. Jadi ada konteks permainan bahasanya. Gitu. Nah, jadi ada 3 premis teman-teman. Aku coba lay aside premis-premisnya ya. Premis pertama gitu ya, bagi teisme, definisi dari teisme adalah bahwa Tuhan itu ada gitu ya. Premis keduanya ya. Oke, kalau teisme itu mengklaim bahwa Tuhan itu ada, maka definisi mengenai ateisme itu harus dipahami di dalam konteks teisme, gitu ya. Oke, dan kemudian proposisi ketiganya, pernyataan bahwa Tuhan itu ada bukanlah kondisi psikologis, ya kan? Bukan suatu state of psychological conditions, gitu ya. Nah, makanya berarti kesimpulannya adalah ateisme itu tidak boleh didefinisikan dari kurangnya kondisi akan yang namanya psikologis, gitu ya. Kondisi psikologis atau kecenderungan psikologis kita terhadap Tuhan itu sendiri, gitu. Jadi begitu teman-teman. So yeah, Ben. So in short, for you, atheism maybe it's a belief that God is not exist. Can I say that God is not exist? A proposition about that? A belief about
yes. That? So I would want to, from a philosophical point of view, say that there is a proposition: God does not exist, and that proposition can be true or false. And I want to say that it's true.
I see. Yeah. Okay. That's. I'm going to continue to that. That's your statement that God is not exist is true from your last from that premise. You know. So I wonder, do you think atheists have the burden of proof for the non-existence of God, Ben?
Yes, so I think that there is a burden of proof or burden of justification for an atheist. However, I also think it's very trivially easy to meet this burden of proof because all you have to do is put out an argument. So saying that atheism is simpler than theism, that might not be a decisive argument, but it's an argument nonetheless, and you can satisfy a burden of justification by just making some sort of simple argument like that. And I think that trying to avoid a burden of justification just isn't really doing philosophy.
Hello.
I see.
Sam.
Okay, please let me translate it again, Ben. So, jadi teman-teman, okay, yeah, sorry, it's a bit delay. I don't know what happened with my internet. It's quite messy today.
It's okay kok.
Okay, it's okay. Okay, it's okay. Okay, I'll continue ya. I'll continue. Jadi pertanyaanku itu adalah apakah ateisme itu harus membuktikan dirinya? Gitu kan, sebagai orang bilang tidak perlu dibuktikan. Tapi menurut Ben, ateisme itu perlu dan harus untuk dibuktikan. Tapi menurut Ben, nggak sulit gitu ya untuk membuktikan ateisme itu tidak sulit. Karena yang perlu kamu lakukan hanyalah melayout atau menyamarkan argumen-argumen yang ada bagi ketidakberadaan Tuhan itu sendiri. Gitu loh. Jadi itu menurut Ben ya, bahwa ateisme itu bisa dibuktikan dan lebih mudah karena ateisme itu lebih sederhana dibandingkan teisme menurut Ben. Dan kita akan coba follow up lebih lanjut, kira-kira ada argumen apa saja dan kenapa dia bisa bilang lebih simple. Okay, Ben, I have two follow-up questions. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can.
Nice. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try to turn off the video first because I'm afraid it will make the recording mess up. So the first one, so you're saying that atheism is simpler, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, maybe you could try to elaborate it a bit, Ben. Why do you think it's simpler? And second, maybe after you answer the first questions, second questions, can you lay out can you give us some? I know there are a lot of good arguments for atheism, but could you share to us some of it? Maybe the first question.
Absolutely. So I think there's several reasons to believe that atheism is simpler than theism. So straightforwardly, theism is not entailed by supernaturalism, but atheism is entailed by naturalism. And so if we start with the assumption that naturalism and supernaturalism have the same level of simplicity, the fact that supernaturalism doesn't entail theism, but naturalism entails atheism, it straightforwardly follows that atheism is simpler than theism. Another way to get this same conclusion is that theism has an equal probable space before even looking at the evidence. So we could say that there's an omnipotent and morally perfect being, an omnipotent and indifferent being, and an omnipotent and evil being. So the prior probability of theism cannot be greater than 1/3. And so if it can't be greater than 1/3, then the other part of that probability space must be atheism. And so it would follow that atheism has a higher prior probability than theism. And so that's another way we can say that atheism is simpler than theism.
Okay, I'll translate it. Jadi teman-teman, kenapa Ben bilang? Jadi gini ya, tadi kan sudah kami bilang ya, buat Ben ateisme itu lebih sederhana dibandingkan teisme. Kenapa? Karena teisme itu mengasumsikan supranaturalisme, ada yang supranatural, gitu, kasarnya begitu ya. Kalau ateisme itu memikirkan yang sebaliknya, gitu ya. Justru tidak ada yang supranatural. Itu nah dari konteks tersebut. Untuk menjelaskan perkara ateisme itu dengan demikian menjadi lebih mudah ya, karena ya kita harus kalau di dalam konteks teisme ada entitas-entitas yang mungkin perlu dijelaskan dan menjadikan penjelasan tersebut lebih kompleks, sedangkan ateisme menjadi lebih sederhana ya, karena apa namanya, lebih tidak ada tambahan-tambahan variabel-variabel lainnya, variabel-variabel yang memang tidak terlihat, gitu ya, tidak natural dan segala macam. Jadi itu menurut Ben akan menjadikan ateisme menjadi lebih sederhana. Okay, Ben, maybe the second questions. Yeah, there are a lot of arguments, but can you share some? Like maybe you could share 3, and which
Yes.
the best argument for the non-existence of God for you?
Yes. So I think the strongest
3 arguments,
argument, the strongest arguments for atheism. So the first argument is the argument from evil. And so this argument goes that theism implies there are no unjustified evils. But when we go and look in the world, there are these unjustified evils. There are things like children who suffer from cancer, non-human animals who suffer in nature, and then really horrific events, things like the Holocaust. So if it's conceded that there are these things called unjustified evils in the world, and those are incompatible with theism because God is perfectly moral and omnipotent, then it follows that God does not exist. So that's the first argument, and I think that's a very, very powerful argument. The second argument, I think, is also very, very powerful, and it's something of a variation of the problem of evil. However, it is also importantly distinct. In the problem of evil, I had to cash out the concept of evil somehow. I had to make some moral assumptions. I don't have to do that in what's called the argument from divine hiddenness. So the argument from divine hiddenness starts off with the idea of a perfectly loving God who is always open to relationship with its creation in the way that a perfectly loving parent would always be open with relationship to their child. But then it notices that there are these types of people in the world that are non-resistant non-theists, which mean that they don't believe that God exists, and they're not in any way resisting God. It's not like there's an emotional or behavioral opposition to God. Someone like a lifelong seeker is trying to find God, but fails in that endeavor. And so then the argument notices that believing that another party exists is a necessary condition for a meaningful relationship. I can't have a meaningful relationship with someone that I don't believe exists. So if God's always open to relationship, then God would always make it the case that everyone knew he existed unless they were resisting. So it follows that there would just be no non-resistant non-theists. But when we look around, there are non-resistant non-theists. Therefore, it follows there's no perfectly loving being. And if there's no perfectly loving being, then there's no God. So that's the argument from divine hiddenness. And then the third argument that I would want to mention is the argument from physical minds. So this is the idea that all known mental change has a physical basis in embodied brains. And so this provides evidential support for the thesis that there is no mental change without physical change. Well, if there's no mental change without any physical change, that rules out a non-physical God, non-physical souls, non-physical ghosts, poltergeists, angels. Any sort of disembodied mind becomes very improbable. So those are the three arguments that I would want to mention that I think are very powerful lines of evidence for atheism: the argument from evil, the argument from hiddenness, and the argument from physical minds.
Okay, yeah. Actually, that second one, the divine hiddenness is, I really felt that the most, from Schellenberg, that's the most the strongest for me personally. But like, it's sometimes it's like,
I feel you. It's a very, very, very powerful argument. And so I go back and forth between hiddenness and evil as what I think is the strongest. There's certainly a case to be made because the hiddenness argument doesn't have to make any moral assumptions. That's just a really powerful feature of that argument. Because there, moves like, well, how do you ground your moral system, or what moral assumptions are you make? None of those objections work.
Yeah, true. And sometimes it's quite personal, I guess. That it's quite personal to talk about hiddenness. People experience. They're praying and it like no answers. And sometimes they just want to believe, but they couldn't believe. So I guess it's also personal for some people.
Yes, and
I'll translate it first, Ben.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Translate.
Yeah. Oke, jadi ada 3 argumen, teman-teman. Jadi saya nanya nih, ada 3 argumen yang terbaik apa aja nih? Ada 3 argumen. Yang pertama argumen dari kejahatan, gitu ya. Soal unjustified evil atau kejahatan yang tidak berarti, tanda kutip ya. Karena biasanya kan orang-orang akan mengatakan, ada loh kejahatan itu baik, karena nanti kejahatan itu adalah suatu hal yang baik, karena mungkin ada rencananya Tuhan lah, gitu loh. Aku terjemahin ya, teisme percaya tidak ada kejahatan yang tidak adil atau unjustified evils. Nah, kenyataannya ada, gitu ya. Anak-anak yang kanker, Holocaust, gitu kan, kelaparan di Afrika, segala macam, gitu kan. Ketiga, dengan demikian, gitu ya, apa yang teisme percaya tentang Tuhan itu dipertanyakan. Yang kedua, itu argumen dari ketersembunyian ilahi. Yang pertama, premisnya, kalau ada Tuhan, maka ia mau berelasi seperti ibu dengan anaknya, gitu kan. Kedua, ada orang-orang yang tidak percaya Tuhan, dan sebenarnya mereka bukannya nggak mau percaya, gitu ya, melainkan mereka itu berusaha untuk mencari, tapi mereka tidak bisa menemukan Tuhan. Gitu kan. Ketiga, kalau Tuhan ada, seharusnya tidak ada orang-orang seperti itu. Kenyataannya ada orang-orang seperti itu. Maka kesimpulannya, Tuhan itu tidak ada. Dan terakhir, argumen dari pikiran fisik. Yang pertama, pikiran itu sifatnya fisik, gitu kan ya. Yang kedua, tidak ada perubahan-perubahan mental tanpa ada perubahan yang fisik, gitu ya. Jadi dengan demikian, hal-hal yang bentuknya mental, ya kayak Tuhan, Tuhan itu kan mental gitu ya, atau hantu, gitu ya, atau poltergeist, itu ya apa yang kayak barang-barang terbang segala macam itu ya hampir nggak ada gitu ya, karena tidak mungkin mental itu terjadi tanpa yang fisik. Maka kesimpulannya yang non fisik itu tidak ada, dan Tuhan termasuk ke dalam bagian yang non fisik. Jadi 3 bagian yang ketiga argumen terkuat, dan teman-teman mungkin boleh kalau mau bertanya kayak nggak setuju, bener boleh banget nggak setuju gitu. Anyway guys, you could disagree with us, so you could you have your rights to be disagree with us, and we want to hear your opinions. If you guys ever have any disagreement and opinions, just leave it on the chat room. Okay, so Ben, do you want to add some things before?
I was just going to say how powerful the argument from divine hiddenness can be, because normally with the argument from evil, we have to make a case for something like there being unjustified evils. But to your point of how this is a more personal argument, if you yourself are a non-resistant non-theist, there is no case for you to make. That's just an observation about yourself. So the step that, making this case for an argument for evil, you just don't even have to make in the argument from hiddenness. And then of course you don't have to make any moral assumptions either. You just start with the concept of perfect love. And so I think you're right. I think that's just a really, really powerful line of reasoning that's super hard to avoid.
It almost makes me an atheist actually. That argument from feeling like that sometimes come, but anyways, but I'm still a atheist right now. I don't know why, but anyway, I'm still. Maybe I want to ask regarding the first arguments, Ben. Could you give us more elaboration? I mean, some people said that a lot of evils in the world could actually there's some good later coming from some evils. Can you elaborate more about these unjustified evils for the audiences?
Yes. So the idea of an unjustified evil is the idea that it's a state of affairs that God would be unjustified in permitting. So theists want to say that God is all-powerful, so he can do anything of which the description is coherent. And they also want to say that God is perfectly moral, meaning that he maximally exemplifies his moral features. So he would be maximally motivated to eliminate all bad states of affairs, because that's what a perfectly moral being would want to do. And so there's several responses to the argument from evil. That there's these ideas that God permits certain evils to allow for greater goods to come about. And so I think atheists should concede this move. And we could say that, look, some of these evils are justified. The question is whether or not there are any unjustified evils. And so one way to argue that there are these unjustified evils is using inductive logic. So this is another way in which the philosophy of religion brings us into another really deep area of philosophy, something like inductive logic, and saying, look, there are these features of evils in the world, and it would be very, very unlikely if all of these evils were counterbalanced by right-making features. That because they have so many wrong-making features, the probability that all of them are sufficiently counterbalanced by right-making features is small. And if that's the case, then we can make the claim that there are probably some unjustified evils, all things considered. And so that's one way to cash out the evidential claim in the argument from evil, to count against God, while at the same time ruling out a move that is often called skeptical theism. This idea that there might be right-making properties or reasons that we're just unaware of, but that an omnipotent and omniscient being would have access to. And so this inductive method tries to undercut that particular move.
Ya, oke. I'll translate to the audiences. Jadi teman-teman, apa sih argumen daripada kejahatan yang tidak bisa dibenarkan? Tadi seperti yang saya bilang, argumen yang tidak bisa dari kejahatan yang tidak bisa dibenarkan ini adalah argumen yang coba untuk ngasih tahu ya. Sebagian teis itu kan selalu berkata ya bahwa dari suatu kejahatan yang ada itu Tuhan mungkin bisa memberikan kebaikan yang lebih baik ke depannya, gitu, a greater good dari kejahatan yang ada. Nah, tapi permasalahannya gitu ya, ketika kita melihat apa yang terjadi di sekitar kita, gitu ya, melalui metode induktif gitu ya, secara logis. Ketika kita memikirkannya dan melihat apa yang ada di sekitar kita, kenyataannya ada gitu ya kejahatan-kejahatan yang memang terjadi dikarenakan kejahatan-kejahatan yang terjadi tanpa adanya justifikasi yang bisa dilakukan terhadapnya lah ya. Tadi seperti yang saya sudah katakan gitu ya, soal penderitaan daripada hewan-hewan gitu ya, dan juga segala macamnya gitu. Nah, jadi argumen ini mau untuk mengatakan hal tersebut gitu ya, bahwa enggak, pada kenyataannya ada loh kejahatan-kejahatan yang nampak seperti itu gitu. Lalu juga ya seperti itu sih teman-teman gitu. Okay, but thank you for those three arguments for atheism. I wonder, but maybe I'll continue to the next questions. I'll wonder for you, what do you think about theism? You know, even though you're an atheist, and maybe Opie already talked like 400 pages book, which try to say that no arguments that are successful for the existence of God. But do you think there's, some arguments that quite strong, or at least quite probable in your opinion, the argument for the existence of God?
Yes, so I do. I am not someone who dogmatically asserts that there just is no evidence for theism. I think there are some evidential chips that fall in favor of theism, and there's some very interesting arguments on the other side that atheists need to take more seriously. So let me just go ahead and mention two of them real quick, my two favorites. So I am much more sympathetic to cosmological and teleological arguments than I am to like moral arguments or ontological arguments. So why is that? So we'll take cosmological arguments first. So I am a fan of the argument from contingency because it appeals to something called the principle of sufficient reason. And I'm sympathetic to that principle. And so what this argument tries to do is to say that the universe has some sort of property. And in this property might be contingency. That's why we get the argument from contingency from. And so because the universe is contingent, the principle of sufficient reason implies that the universe has an explanation other than itself. And so then there's the move in the cosmological argument, where I think it's the most problematic is the move from this necessary cause of the universe to a perfect being. Now to move to teleological arguments, this is probably my favorite argument. And so it's often called the argument from design. And so what it attempts to do is try to infer an intelligent designer from observed goal directedness in the world, from what seems to be intentional design in the world. And so I think the observation of moral agents is something that is more expected under something like theism than under something like naturalism. Why do I think that? Well, first off, theism entails the existence of at least one moral agent, God. So the probability that we should observe moral agents given theism is 1. So that's just that's just a powerful antecedent reason on theism to predict something like moral agents. Whereas naturalism is going to have to explain moral agency as something radically accidental. Perhaps it was something that was selected for. However, the feature of being a moral agent in the world is not entailed by something like a weak anthropic principle. So it's going to, the probability that there's going to be moral agents given naturalism is always going to be less than 1. So I think that this is a probabilistic judgment where you can say, look, the fact that we observe moral agents in the world that occupy a moral arena and make morally significant decisions is just more likely given theism than naturalism. And so that's I think the strongest evidential chip that falls in favor of theism. That's my favorite argument for theism.
Okay. So yeah, cosmological and theological arguments. Yeah, Ben. Okay, I'll translate it first, Ben, and maybe later, Faiz, you want to add something? Yeah. Okay, so I'll translate it, and then Faiz, maybe you want to add something. Jadi, yep, Faiz.
No, it's okay. You can translate it first.
Okay, ya, I'll translate it first. Oke, jadi 2 argumen yang menurut Ben itu yang paling kuat bagi teisme. Jadi meskipun Ben itu ateis, tapi dia kayak ada argumen yang kuat juga nih. Gitu. Nanti kita tanya kenapa. Jadi yang pertama itu adalah argumen dari yang pertama itu argumen ini ya, alam semesta gitu ya, cosmological argumen kosmologis. Yang kedua itu argumen teleologis gitu. Nah, argumen kosmologis ini secara sederhana melihat bahwa kalau alam semesta itu kontingen, gitu ya, maka berarti ada yang niscaya lah. Gitu. Nah, dari situ, gitu ya, mereka itu menarik, gitu ya, karena ada yang kontingen, ada yang niscaya, maka kesimpulannya 3, yang niscaya ini adalah sesuatu yang ilahiyah dan juga sempurna. Jadi 3 susunan tersebut. Argumen kedua itu adalah argumen teleologis, gitu ya, bahwa yang namanya dunia atau alam semesta ini diciptakan secara seakan-akan tuh ada tujuannya. Jadi ada sosok yang diciptakan dengan suatu tujuan. Gitu. Nah, dari sana nariknya ke mana? Nariknya ke keberadaan daripada Tuhan itu sendiri, yang mana adalah agen yang punya intensi dan menciptakan dunia ini yang isinya kita kayak orang-orang yang punya kecerdasan segala macam dan lainnya. Dan anyway, mohon maaf teman-teman, aku internet tadi nggak beres, jadi agak potong-potong. Kalau penerjemahanku nggak sempurna, aku mohon maaf gitu ya. Jadi 2 itu, argumen kosmologis sama argumen teleologis gitu. Faiz, you want to add something, please? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was about to ask regarding the arguments for atheism, concerning the argument of evil. You said that on the argument of evil is concerning justified evils, right? It was built on the premise that theists believe that there are justified evils, like there may be some good outcomes from evil in this world, but apparently by inductive logic reasoning, there are more unjustified evil. Well, what do you think about this quite popular argument about the argument of evil from Saint Augustine. Yeah, it's a pretty popular argument from this perspective, where uh, he said that evil by itself is not a creation of God, uh, whereas the condition of it's just the condition of lack of good. It's just the lack of good. Like there's no evil as a being, as a metaphysical distinct being from good, but rather just the lack of good. And God didn't create evil by himself. Yeah. Uh, what do you think about that, Ben? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this question. This is a great question. So to give you gave a good background. I don't want to have to give the background that you'd have to translate. So this is often known as the privation view of evil. So it's the idea that evil doesn't have any positive existence in the world. So anything that has substance, form, and being is in itself good. And so if we call something evil, it's because it lacks something. So if we were to add something else with substance, form, and being to this, it would no longer be evil. And so I want to say at least three things about this move. So even if we concede this view of evil, and that God does not directly create evil, then we must still explain why God allows privation evils to exist. So we still have a problem of the missing good. So that's the first thing I would want to say. The second thing I would want to say is to appeal to David Hume's famous distinction between is and ought. So this idea that saying that something is some way is different than saying that it ought to be some other way. So this privation theory of evil identifies being with goodness. It identifies an is with an ought. And so Hume says that that just can't happen. That gap can't be bridged. These are two different kinds of facts. If we're going to say that there is a true ought fact, then that's going to state an ought truth, not an is truth. And so that's the second thing I would want to say. The third thing I would want to say is to challenge this as even a plausible view of evil itself, because I think that this theory is going to have a difficult time accounting for certain paradigmatic examples of evil like pain and depression. We can't reduce the evil of pain to the privation of pleasure or some other feeling. Pain is a distinct phenomenological experience that is positively evil and not merely not good. And so it would also have this implication that the only thing evil about pain is that we are not currently in it. Because insofar as pain does exist, insofar as it has substance, form, and being, it is good for us, and God is willing it for us. And so it seems like we wouldn't have any reason to want to avoid future pain. And that seems very counterintuitive. So we can formulate an argument against this and say that, look, everyone has reason to want to avoid future pain. The privation view of evil implies we don't have such a reason. Therefore, the privation theory of evil is false. So those are the three things. So we'd still have the problem of the missing good. We would still have Hume's is-ought distinction, and then we would have these implausibilities of not really being able to account for paradigmatic evils that are positive evils in the world, like pain and depression.
Faiz, ada follow up?
No. That's okay for me.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that question. That was a great question.
I'll translate it to the audiences. Jadi pertanyaan itu Faiz bertanya soal menurut Agustinus gitu ya, kejahatan itu bukan suatu kondisi, kejahatan itu tidak positif gitu ya, mainkan ketidakberadaan daripada kebaikan. Gitu ya Faiz kurang lebih ya. Gitu dan pertanyaannya gimana pendapatnya Ben? Nah, kalau menurut Ben ada 3 sanggahan gitu ya. Yang pertama, kalaupun memang definisi daripada kejahatan adalah ketidaktiadaan daripada kebaikan, masih kita layak untuk bertanya kenapa Tuhan izinkan, gitu ya. Kurang lebih seperti itu sederhananya. Kalaupun memang itu definisinya kenapa Tuhan izinkan. Yang kedua tadi aku agak skip, Faiz kalau mau terjemahin juga boleh tolong. Yang ketiga itu adalah terkait dengan ada beberapa hal yang kenyataannya itu ada dan jadi negatif. Misalnya perasaan sakit dan juga depresi. Itu kan suatu hal yang buruk, tapi itu suatu kondisi, gitu ya, suatu keadaan positif. Dan itu akan jadi baik kalau misalnya kita tidak punya perasaan sakit dan tidak punya depresi. Nah, jadi definisi itu pun jadi goncang. Yang kedua gimana, Is? Bisa tolong kamu ini nggak?
Jujur aku belum baca Hume,
Oh
jadi
iya,
nggak
oke.
terlalu nganggep juga.
Jadi yang kedua itu dari Hume. Gitu. Jadi yang kedua itu dari Hume. Kalau Hume itu merasa bahwa ya sama aja gitu ya, tidak masuk akal dan segala macam. Nanti mungkin kita akan layout terjemahannya karena internetnya gangguan, jadi bete banget itu, aku nggak nangkap semuanya. Oke, berarti itu untuk pertanyaan selanjutnya. Kita coba pertanyaan lagi. Oke, but that so yeah, we're talking about argument for atheism and argument for theism, and maybe I want to do some follow-ups. So some people said that, okay, so yeah, some people said that actually there's no, can I say that, so when some people said that actually there is no evidence for God, could you say that you disagree with them? Can I say like that?
Yes. Yes, I think there's trivially examples in which certain observations are evidence for theism. Religious experiences. Theism predicts religious experiences, naturalism doesn't. Religious experiences are just a straightforward evidential chip that fall in favor of theism.
Ya, ya. Ya, jadi aku nanya, sebagian ateis itu percaya kalau misalnya nggak ada yang namanya, nggak ada bukti yang baik untuk Tuhan. Pada kenyataannya ada kok. Pada kenyataan ada bukti-bukti yang bisa kita lihat, alami dari Tuhan. Misalnya pengalaman religius, gitu ya. And some people actually talk about religious experience. Some philosophers have been like, I don't know, who's that? Alston, can I say he's one of the people who's talked about religious experience?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, Alston. And so there's two ways to cash out an argument from religious experience. So you can take the Alston route, that's saying that, look, hey, these sorts of observations are more probable given theism than naturalism. But then there's another route that is defended by Alvin Plantinga, which is basically its own epistemology. Again, here's philosophy of religion bringing us into another part of philosophy, epistemology. This idea that belief in God is properly basic, meaning that our experiences of God provide us with defeaters for any reasons to doubt. So just like we can have an experience of the external world, and we are justified in believing in an external world, it doesn't matter what kind of arguments we have against the external world. Our experience of the external world is sufficient to justify our belief that there is an external world. And so it's a similar move with Plantinga's Reformed epistemology. He's saying, look, the religious experiences that we have justify our belief that of, what's called, if you have a religious experience of Jesus, that justifies your belief that Jesus is a divine being, and that you do have a relationship with him. So these are two radically different, though related, ways of cashing out an argument from religious experience. And I don't think that a lot of atheists take those arguments as seriously as they should, because I think they are powerful arguments.
I see. Yeah. Actually, my research interest is in Alvin Plantinga Reformed epistemology. So yeah, I wrote some of his. I wrote my undergraduate thesis back then about Plantinga. Okay, so I'll translate it first, man. Ya. Jadi ada argumen juga dari pengalaman religius, teman-teman. Jadi ada loh filsafat yang berargumen bahwa pengalaman religius itu pada kenyataannya bisa membuktikan rasionalitas kepercayaan kita kepada Tuhan. Beberapa di antaranya adalah William Alston dan juga Alvin Plantinga. Nah, kalau Alston itu percaya bahwa ya pengalaman religius membuktikan atau adalah suatu hal yang memang menunjukkan keberadaan Tuhan bahkan, gitu ya. Jadi sampai ke sana titiknya. Sedangkan kalau plantingnya itu punya perspektif yang disebut sebagai epistemological reform yang sudah pernah kami bahas. Yeah, we once invited Tyler last week actually. Last week we invited
Tyler McNabb.
Yeah, McNabb. Yeah, last week.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Great guy, good
Yeah.
friend of mine.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, we invited one, and yeah, we already talked too much, I guess, about reform epistemology. But anyway, yeah. Mungkin teman-teman bisa lihat itu nanti juga di video-video sekolah. Okay, Ben, I want to continue. Sorry, two last questions from me. Okay, the first, so yeah, we talk about the argument for atheism and also argument for theism, and how you view that, even though maybe, even though atheism have a really strong, a lot of strong arguments, but it doesn't mean that theism have no arguments or evidences. There are actually evidences for theism. And I want to ask about another thing. What do you think about the future of atheism? I mean, will there be the demise of religion one day, like what people said? A lot of people said that there will be progress and there will be no religion, and yeah, everyone will be atheist. What do you think about those kind of statements?
Yes, so this is a great question, because this is one of the things I want to explore with my project, because I think that a lot of atheists get this wrong of what future religion is going to look like. So a lot of atheists will claim that religion is just going to go away, and that we're just all going to be atheists, and religion is just going to be kind of this archaic thing of the past, like alchemy or something along those lines. And I don't think that's right. Religion has been with us for at least 60,000 years of human history. So it was likely selected for. Religions aren't just sets of doctrines, they are forms of life, and they help people live lives. They provide fulfilling forms of life. So rather than religion dying out or going extinct, I think it's going to evolve. So that raises another question. What is it going to evolve into? What is it going to look like? That's where I think we're going to say, okay, religions are going to look a lot more like what we would call atheism today. But I think eventually, once theism falls away, again, I think we define atheism in terms of theism. Once we've rejected something like theism, the concept and definition of something like atheism will fall away. So what's going to replace it? I think there's two pieces that are going to replace it. There's going to be a metaphysical portion, and there's going to be an ethical portion. And so I think the metaphysical portion will look like naturalism. And I think the ethical portion of it will look like humanism. And so I think that religions of the future are going to resemble something like pantheism or Taoism, a Chinese tradition, or Buddhism. And so things like prayer are going to, instead of being seen as like having these kind of causal powers in the world, prayer is going to look more like meditation, where people see that prayer is more for the person doing the praying than anyone else that's being prayed for. I think that something like going to church or the community that we would find in humanism in doing moral philosophy, trying to ask questions like, how do we lead a good life? What ought we do? And then the metaphysical portion of it is going to be naturalism. It's going to be this idea that, look, nature is what's fundamental, and that's what the nature of the divine consists of, and that's what's worthy of our reverence. So going on trips to see total solar eclipses or other natural wonders of the world will be what religious tradition, that the religious destinations won't be things like Mecca or places, religious temples or things like that. It will be natural wonders of the world.
Oh, nice. I love it. Thank you. I'll try to translate it first, Ben. Jadi pertanyaanku adalah, orang-orang kan berargumen nih, kalau atau berkata bahwa akan ada waktu di mana agama menghilang sama sekali. Menurut Ben nggak? instead of agama hilang sama sekali, agama itu akan berubah atau evolving. Jadi akan berubah bentukan. Bentukan seperti apa? Ada dua hal gitu, bentukan yang secara berubah fundamental. Pertama secara metafisik dan juga yang kedua secara etis. Nantinya menurut Ben di masa depan agama-agama itu akan berbentuk seperti Daoisme, ya, Buddhisme dan nuansa panteistik gitu loh. Nah, gimana tuh maksudnya? Secara metafisik itu akan lean sama yang namanya naturalisme gitu ya. Naturalisme itu apa sih? Sekali lagi itu kepercayaan bahwa tidak ada yang supranatural, sesederhananya begitu ya. Jadi nanti orang-orang itu kalau pergi ibadah bukan lagi pergi ke gereja segala macam, tapi perginya ke tempat-tempat yang memberikan perasaan kagum gitu, yang mana bentukannya alamiah juga gitu ya. Mungkin pergi melihat gerhana matahari, mungkin pergi ke Niagara atau bagaimana lah ya. Pokoknya yang memberikan kita kekaguman. Yang kedua, secara etis. Secara etis itu nanti bentukannya jadi humanisme. Gitu. Jadi akan bentukannya humanisme dan tidak akan depend banyak sama mungkin perintah-perintah Tuhan segala macam. Dan satu lagi yang menarik, doa bukan lagi dilihat sebagai suatu kalau Tuhan tuh akan bekerja dalam dunia, tapi lebih kepada yang meditatif gitu tadi ya, nuansa Buddhisme segala macam gitu. So yeah, thank you Ben, it's really interesting. And this will be my last questions from me. Do you have any book recommendations for us to read about atheism? You know, maybe some introductory, or do you think this, if someone want to read about atheism, then someone needs to read this?
Yes, so I think the most important place to start in the philosophy of religion is David Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. So I think that is the most important work ever written in the philosophy of religion, and all of philosophy of religion is just a continuation of that dialogue. So it's a great place to start as well, an introductory. It's a great read, it's a fun read, it's an accessible read, and it'll help get you primed to go deeper into the philosophy of religion. If you're looking to take it up a notch, if you consider yourself pretty well understood in the basics and want to go even deeper, the two works that I would recommend are J.L. Mackey's The Miracle of Theism and J.H. Sobel's Logic in Theism. Now, these are dense works. These are works that you could pore over for years. I've been poring over them for almost 10 years now. They're ones that you can just always keep coming back to. They're very technical. And so it's a great way to learn the technicality of philosophy. As you decode these works and work through them, you're going to build a very, very deep philosophical toolbox in logic, epistemology, metaphysics, ethics. You're going to be able to touch on all those subjects. And I think those are the three most important works. And the good thing about The Miracle of Theism and The Logic of Theism is they cite Hume a lot. A lot of the discussion takes place within what Hume was saying in Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. So that work will prime you for those two big, beefy works.
Okay, so teman-teman 3 buku ya. David Hume, aku udah tulis tuh, David Hume, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, itu juga sangat bagus. Yeah, actually, David Hume is one of my favorite philosophers, you know. He really always blow my mind every time I read it. Yeah, I love him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan yang kedua itu J.L. Mackey, Miracle of Theism. Itu juga salah satu yang ditawarin sama Ben Watkins. Sama ketiga Jordan Howard Sobel ya, Logic and Theism. Dan yang mana kedua-duanya ini banyak ngutip si David Hume. Jadi David Hume adalah pengantar yang baik untuk masuk ke dua yang ini. Tapi ini sangat teknis, teman-teman. Jadi saranku memang lebih baik baca David Hume terlebih dahulu, baru yang lain-lain gitu. Jadi itu kalau mau belajar soal ateisme yang paling baik. What do you think about OP's arguing about gods? You know, maybe it's too technical, or what do you think about
that? That would be my fourth. But so I could only I tried to limit myself to 3. My fourth would be Graham Oppy's Arguing About Gods. And my fifth would be Schellenberg's Hiddenness Argument. He has his first book, Human Reason and Divine Hiddenness, but he also has a newer book that's just called The Hiddenness Argument. So I think that's a great book. as well, and Oppie's arguing about gods. That would round out, those 5 are, if you've read those 5 books, you are, an expert in a non-theist view of philosophy of religion. Like those are just the works.
I see. Sure. And anyway, actually, me and some of my colleagues tried to translate OP's book. So yeah, in Indonesia. So yeah, I guess it's a good news for the atheists. I don't know. I try to represent atheism in a good way, because a lot of people here try to depend too much to some popular apologetics, man. Even Frank Turek, and some other apologists quite well known here in the evangelical circle. So that's why I also want to make it's more representative to listen to people like OP and even you. And so yeah. Anyway, just for your information. Jadi teman-teman, yeah.
The 6th book I would recommend is the book that I'm going to write in the future.
I see. So you're writing about it right now, Ben.
I haven't written it yet, but I'm going to write it.
I'm hoping the best for that. Okay, I'll translate it, and there are some questions from the audience. Vice will read it from the audiences. Jadi buku keempat dan kelima itu adalah Divine Hiddenness-nya Schellenberg. Itu buku bagus, aku suka banget. Aku suka banget dan hampir bikin aku jadi ateis. Yang kelima itu juga Graham Oppy ya, Arguing About Gods, itu juga bagus banget. Dan bukunya tebel, 400 halaman, dan kami lagi terjemahin actually. Jadi nanti kalau udah diterjemahan dan sudah dijual, kami akan kabar-kabarin juga. Aku sih sebenarnya, aku sama beberapa teman. And gitu. And again, Ben, Divine Hiddenness actually almost make me it's. I'm writing actually. I'm actually back then in the past. I'm writing about a thesis which I try to answer objection from Schellenberg, and it almost turned out the other way. Maybe it's true, maybe Schellenberg is true, Yeah, I almost becoming
that's how I changed my mind about a lot of theistic arguments. So I would not have said what I said about the contingency argument earlier tonight 3 or 4 years ago, but then I read Josh Rasmussen on the contingency argument. I was like, this is a really good argument.
Yeah. Jadi gitu teman-teman. Jadi so yeah, I want to add one more statement maybe. So yeah, I personally feel that philosophy of religion make us really humble, towards other people's views about religion. That's what I feel personally.
Absolutely, I agree 100% with that statement.
Nah, jadi memang filsafat agama ini bikin kita rendah hati teman-teman sama pandangan orang lain yang mungkin berbeda dari kita. So Vice, do you want to read the question from Michael and Muhammad Akbar?
Yeah. Okay, sure. The first one is from Mikhail Yosef. They ask, what do you think about the definition of faith? Theists usually doesn't have firm definition on faith. Sometimes they explain it just as a subjective experience, and sometimes they also explain it as rational belief. Why usually atheist doesn't buy faith?
Yes, this is another really great question. So I think there's a lot of confusion about the language games surrounding the word faith. So a lot of atheists in my camp want to construe faith as a belief without evidence. And I don't think that's the most charitable understanding of the concept of faith. So theists also use the term faith to mean roughly trust. So to have trust in something. And so I think we atheists use this concept quite frequently. And to give an example, so some parent might have a very, very sick child, and the diagnosis might be very, very bad. And so we might say, look, there's not a whole lot of evidence that this child is going to make it. But then the parent might say, well, I have faith in modern medicine, or I have faith in the doctors at this hospital. And what they're saying is, they're not saying, I believe my child is going to survive, even though there's just no evidence. In fact, it's contrary to the evidence. What they're saying is that they trust that the best hope for their child is going to be through the medical staff at this hospital, or in modern medicine. And so I think that there is this place for this concept called faith, where we have to just put our trust in something else, because there's nothing like we have to make this leap of faith somewhere. And so I think you can have a rational faith, in the sense of you put your leaps of faith where you think you put your trust where you think it's the best. I might not have evidence that my new girlfriend is going to be the best wife in the world. No one could have that sort of evidence, but you might say, I have faith in this woman and trust her in taking this leap to get married and spend the rest of our life with. I think that's a very coherent concept, and one that, even if we are atheists, we're not going to be able to just do away with it. And I think understanding it in this way also allows us to be more charitable to theists, instead of saying, oh, well, they just believe things on faith, and this is just their way of believing things without appealing to any evidence. I think that's very, very uncharitable.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben. I'll try to translate it. Jadi soal iman ya, menarik gitu ya. Ben ini punya posisi yang menarik, karena buat dia kalau bicara soal iman, pada satu sesi teis itu bisa memberikan bisa menjadikan pemahamannya tentang iman itu menjadi suatu hal yang masuk akal juga gitu untuk mempercayai Tuhan. Jadi kalau menurut Ben, ateis gitu ya, atau orang-orang yang tidak percaya bisa untuk menjadi lebih terbuka, lebih berbaik hati kepada teis yang memang mencoba untuk percaya hanya lewat iman saja. Tetapi kayaknya itu nggak bikin ateis untuk percaya, Faiz ya tadi ya, nggak tidak menarik buat ateis, tapi itu bisa menjadi suatu hal yang masuk akal bagi mereka yang mempercayainya, yaitu orang-orang teis. Oke, thank you, Ben. Faiz, satu lagi.
Okay, we're gonna move to two other questions.
Maybe if you can make it short, Faiz, like to summarize.
There's this question concerning justice and injustice. Talking about justice and injustice is very interesting, but I have one question. What if it turns out that God's benchmark in seeing justice and injustice is far different from what we have believed so far? How can we know what God means by justice? And furthermore, isn't it weird if we as human can understand how God think about justice and injustice? Should we call it God if that's happened? I guess this is a very interesting case of God's paradox.
Yes, and it also helps us demarcate two traditions. So in Hume's famous dialogues concerning natural religion, he puts different characters as different views in the philosophy of religion. And so there's Cleanthes, who is this, kind of modern, the apologist, the natural theologian, who's trying to do natural theology. But then there's this other character, Demia. And Demia is the mystic. He's the way of approaching religion and saying, look, the concepts of something like justice and injustice, when we're trying to understand the nature of the divine and God, is just forever beyond our understanding, at least in this life. We would have to, in some way, become closer to God, maybe in another life, in order to understand these concepts. And so that this is just its own way of approaching theological questions. And so something like my argument from evil is going to be blunted by this tradition, because it's basically saying that, look, God is ineffable, we can't use ordinary language to understand it. And if we're finding some problem in the concepts of God, it's because we're using concepts that are too close to us and too far away from God.
Oke, I'll translate it, Ben. Oke, so jadi pertanyaannya si Fresian ini menggambarkan dua kelompok yang digambarkan sama David Hume di dalam dialog concerning natural religions itu, yaitu Keyntes dan Demia. Jadi Keyntes ini adalah mereka kelompok pertama yang merepresentasikan apologis lah, kasarnya begitu. Jadi merasa bahwa agama itu bisa masuk akal, ada argumen-argumen yang ada, lalala segala macam. Dan yang kedua, Demia ini lebih ke mistis gitu, teman-teman. Nah, jadi ini dua kelompok yang berbeda dan punya pemahaman yang berbeda mengenai Tuhan. Nah, makanya tadi Ben bilang kalau misalnya dia nyampein argumen apa unjustified evil ini ke yang mistis itu ke Demia itu nggak bakal masuk lah ke Demianya. Jadi memang kita perlu pahamin ada dua tradisi berbeda ini. Gitu. Singkatnya begitu. Ya. Oke, Faiz, ada lagi yang bisa kamu tambahin pertanyaan?
Maybe there's this one question concerning what we already talked about. There's a lot of argument from theists that says if there is no God, there will be no objective morality. How would you answer that problem of objective morality?
Yes, so I am an objectivist about morality, and I'm also an atheist. So I just reject the assumption that objective morality implies something like theism. So my view is known as ethical non-naturalism. And so basically the idea here is that I believe that some things apply some things matter in a reason implying sense. They matter because we all have reasons to care about them. And so one of the examples I gave earlier was pain. I said that pain was bad, that we all have reason to want to avoid future pain. So I'm saying something about the object of my judgment. I'm saying something about pain. I'm not saying something about me. And so I think this concept of a reason is what we can build a moral framework on. So for example, we might say that some reason is a moral reason if it's weightier than any other reasons that we have. So to give an example, we might all have reason to want to act in ways that would make things go impartially best. So that idea that there are principles that could make things go impartially best if we acted on them would be an objective fact about it. And the reason that it gave us would be weightier than any other reason we had. If something would be disallowed by a principle that would make things go impartially best, that's a reason to think that it's wrong. So I push back, I just flat out reject the assumption that something like God's nature or God's commands are what constitute morality. Instead, I think it's reasons that constitute morality. And I actually think that most theists agree with this. In responding to something like the problem of evil, they will say things that, well, God has a morally sufficient reason for permitting this evil. So it seems like, yes, it's morality at bottom is about reasons. It's not about commands or what God is like.
Nice. I'll translate it. Jadi kalau nggak ada Tuhan, itu tidak ada objektivitas moral. Menurut Ben, tentu salah. Karena Ben adalah seorang objektivis terkait moral dan juga dia adalah seorang ateis. Jadi, untuk mengatakan bahwa objektivitas hanyalah milik teisme itu salah besar. Gitu. Kok bisa seorang ateis itu percaya yang objektif? Misalnya kita ambil contoh lah, perasaan sakit. Perasaan sakit itu kan suatu hal yang nggak mungkin, ya ada perkara yang individualnya, tapi sebagian besar cukup objektif lah ya, gitu, perasaan sakit. Dan lebih daripada itu, perkara soal moralitas atau yang baik dan yang buruk itu juga adalah suatu hal yang dipikirkan melalui akal atau nalar gitu ya. Jadi misalnya kita juga ngomong kan kalau ngomongin soal Tuhan punya alasan yang baik dibalik melakukan hal yang seperti ini, seperti itu. Jadi ini lebih soal lebih ke soal bernalar daripada soal perintah ya, komen. Jadi soal nalar dipikirkan semata soal perintah gitu ya, rule 1, rule 2, rule 3. Jadi lebih ke mengandalkan kemampuan nalar kita gitu loh. Jadi itu. And Ben, I'm sorry, but we ask one last questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead. I'm having a blast. This is a lot of fun. I'm very grateful to be here.
Please read from Sam.
Okay. there's this two questions from Sam. Uh, okay. Hello, I'm Sam. One of the arguments that is not mentioned, and I find it interesting, is the determinism argument. I am a determinist, which means there is no such thing whatever we do in the world. In other words, God created the universe like playing a game. So what do you think about this argument? And the second question, I don't believe in the concept of God anymore, but I still sometimes fear the concept of hell. I feel this is because I was indoctrinated since childhood. So what do you think about overcoming the trauma of religion?
Wow, these are two very big questions. So I want to start off by saying that the question of free will is a very, very deep question. Just another one of those deep questions that philosophy of religion, affords us the opportunity to explore. And so I am sympathetic to this questioner's view, in that I do believe that something like determinism is true, and that it rules out something that's called libertarian free will. But I'm also what's called a compatibilist, meaning that I believe that there is a concept of free will that is compatible with determinism. However, I think the compatibilist route raises some very serious issues for the theistic hypothesis. So one of the famous ways out of the problem of evil is the free will defense, which assumes that libertarian account of free will that I said I don't ascribe to. The reason they have to do that is because the compatibilist, it seems like God could determine every person to always choose right, and that this determining his creation to act in this way is compatible with him having free will. So it seems like the fact that God just didn't avail himself of this better possibility of creating a world where he determines everything to go exactly right just straightforwardly counts against theism. That's a really, I think the theist has to affirm something like libertarian free will if they want to have any sort of out from that kind of argument. The second question was about the doctrine of hell and how we can kind of overcome the trauma that comes with being indoctrinated by such a concept at such a young age. Because I was, the imagery of hellfire and gnashing of teeth and people, dealing with things like deaths of family and friends who we said were not saved and would end up in hell. These things very much bothered me as well. And so while I'm not going to be able to give the best advice in dealing with this trauma, because I'm not a psychologist, I can say what has helped me overcome this. And the answer is simply philosophy. So I think the more philosophy I did, the more I realized the doctrine of hell makes no sense if you actually think about it. If you're talking about a perfectly good and perfectly loving God, which is what we would be considering if there was theism, I have no idea how you square eternal conscious torment with something like perfect love and moral perfection. I think it literally entails a contradiction. And so if I were to be a theist, I would almost certainly be what's known as a universalist, this idea that everyone eventually goes to heaven. And if that's not the case, then just all the worse for theism. That's just that, like, the idea that there's this eternal place that you go to, again, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Where is heaven? Where is hell? Like, how do we get there? And what does it mean to suffer for eternity? I think the more philosophy we do in thinking about this, the more we realize this is just an incoherent doctrine that just we have no good reason. We can feel very relieved in knowing there's no good reason to believe that this is an actual place.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really, I feel it also represent me for my own personal view. That's why I think that philosophy is really liberating. Liberating
Yes.
a lot of things, and one of the things that I started to questioning I don't know. I need to be careful. Yeah. But anyway, I'm started to questioning like doctrine of hell, and yeah, it's too, it's too scary, quote unquote. To think that a good God will do those kind of things. It's quite contradictory, and yeah, it's liberating and also transforming to learn philosophy, and that's what we
Yes.
try to do. Yeah. So I'll translate it, Ben. Jadi dua hal untuk merespon Sam tadi. Thank you Sam buat pertanyaannya. Yang pertama itu terkait determinisme itu ya bagaimana? Kalau menurut Ben, yang namanya teis itu harus mengadopsi ini ya kebebasan bebas sepenuh-penuhnya. Nah, kalau menurut dia sih ya untuk menjawab permasalahan kejahatan. Jadi isu determinisme itu menjadi isu yang besar bagi sebagian teis sebenarnya gitu, karena itu ya salah satu argumen yang bagi teisme itu kan argumen daripada kehendak bebas, dan kalau argumen dari kehendak bebas itu berarti harus berargumen atau mempresuposisikan yang namanya kebebasan sebebas-bebasnya gitu. Jadi memang itu bermasalah buat teisme. Yang kedua, untuk mengatasi trauma soal doktrin neraka itu agak lebih kompleks karena Ben juga bukan psikolog gitu kan. Jadi mungkin bisa look out buat psikolog sih Sam gitu. Jadi look out for psikolog. Tapi anyway, satu hal yang menolong dia untuk melewati itu semua adalah untuk belajar filsafat gitu ya. Belajar filsafat itu pada kenyataannya membebaskan dan juga mengubah kehidupan sih. Jadi ya untuk belajar filsafat dan melihat bahwa ternyata doktrin-doktrin itu banyak yang berkontradiksi kalau menurut dia gitu ya. Tapi at the end itu keputusan teman-teman untuk memikirkannya gitu. Oke, jadi itu Sam, thank you buat pertanyaannya, dan Faiz, no more questions, right?
Yeah. There's none, right?
Okay, sure. So yeah, Ben, it's been an hour and a half. I'm really sorry if it's taking your time too much, but yeah.
No, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me. It really was an honor to come and speak to you about these subjects that very much interest me. Thank you so much for thinking of me and inviting me.
Yeah, I hope this not only the first time. I hope maybe later we have second or even the third time if you're willing.
Absolutely.
If you're willing.
Absolutely. I would love to.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thank you all. Thank you, friends. Like it's already almost 11 p.m. and still 25 people still here to listen to us talking about this thing. So appreciate all of you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, Ben. Once again, thank you so much, and yeah, I'm hoping to talk with you again. And you could check out Ben's works in Real Theology in Twitter, and also Ben's personal account. You could check it out in Twitter, and yeah, give a follow and try. Personally, Real Theology give me a lot of updates about atheism, and that's why I'm also following Real Theology in Twitter. So you could check it out and listen and read some of their tweets about atheism. So yeah, Ben, I think I could finish these discussions, and I'll see you again, everyone who's coming today here. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, Ben.
You too.